There we go. All right, perfect. Welcome to the Karlie and Brooke Show, where we interview top authors and bring you tips and tricks on writing so that you can become a successful author someday. Be sure to check out our Instagrams for daily tips on writing. All right, so today is my first live by myself. So I'm going to be honest, I'm a little nervous. I definitely might stumble over my words, repeat myself a bunch, stare at my screen as I'm reading my notes to myself, but I'm excited to try this. We'll see how it goes. So let's talk about romance. And this is going to be full disclosure. It's definitely for beginners. There's nothing too advanced in here. It's going to be probably stuff you've heard before. And it's definitely more like the cleaner Hallmark type of romance tips. It's not there's a whole separate kind of a list of rules for your dark romance or your erotica, and I'll make a different video on that in the future. But this is definitely going to be more for like your cleaner, your Hallmark type movies, your Nicholas Spark romance novels type of genre. So let's see here. First on our list. So when you're writing romance, it can be its own genre in its own. Like the whole book is essentially just about these two characters falling in love. Or it can be a subplot. Let's say your book is all based on fantasy, or if it's a mystery novel, you can have a romantic subplot to follow along with your main storyline. So those are kind of, you have to decide, if your book is going to be solely the purpose of these two people getting together, or if it's kind of just an extra layer that you're adding on to your existing story. The reason why you want to know that is because then when you get into your subgenres, especially if you're writing romance as its own full genre, they have subgenres in that genre. So like, for instance, if you're writing romance, you could write like a historical romance. And online, I read that's anything that comes before 1950 is considered historical. And then anything after 1950 is considered like more modern day contemporary. So there's subgenres for romance as far as like your historical romance, contemporary romance. You can even have like romance where they have like religious or spiritual elements to it, like Christian romance. There's paranormal romance if you're dealing with like vampires, ghosts, werewolves. And I mean, the list goes on and on. And then once you figure out like what genre romance you write in, that will let you know what the tropes are. So each genre has its own list of tropes. And some people like really try to steer away from tropes, and I'm so. Tropes exist for a reason, and especially in romance, sometimes readers expect something. Like if you're doing like a star-crossed lovers, right? Like there's a whole tropes that go along with that people kind of want. But it's important to know what those tropes are so you can add your own spin on it and put your own twist. And so if you go down, let's see. So some instances as far as like what those tropes are like your friends to lovers, your enemies to lovers. There's like the insta love, your star-crossed lovers, or there's like the slow burn romance. That's my favorite. And so, and again, the list, there's so many different ones. There's the one bed, there's the I mean, so many different genres. So it's really good to kind of nail down early on before you really start writing to figure out what genre you are in so that you actually can know what the tropes are and know how to make it your own. So let's keep moving on here. So when you're setting up your romance, like when you're having these two characters meet for the first time, you want to set the scene. And that can come as far as like setting the mood and the tone between these two people, or it could be as far as like actually what location that they're in. So setting the scene, if their characters, if your book takes place in like Paris or like Venice, Italy, someplace like that where it's really, really just in itself romantic, will give it a different element than if you have it like set in like really busy New York City. It will have a different vibe. So you can set the scene with your location, and then also, or like if you're doing like having a meet like in a little coffee shop, like your scene kind of can set a tone and like kind of set up their whole relationship. And then you want to set the scene between them, right? So you want to either, depending on if you're doing like enemies to lovers or friends to lovers, you want their first interaction to kind of like hint to the reader that maybe this is a potential love interest, or if they like hate each other right off the back, maybe the protagonist, I don't know, find something attractive, irritating about that person. So just kind of gets the reader like a hint, like pay attention to these two people interacting because something's going to happen, right? And so kind of like if you're thinking like as far as like the Notebook, right? Like they're polar opposites from one another, and they butt heads all the time, and so it creates this tension on the screen. And then, and then as much as they fight, that's how intense their love is. And so it really like creates this opposite and this dynamic between the two of them. And that's just, one example. But that's, if you have like your characters, opposites always work great, but you want your romantic lead to not just solely exist for the purpose of your protagonist. If the romantic lead doesn't have like their own goals or their own motives for whatever they're doing, they're going to feel very like not real, and that they are just almost an insert and they're just there for your protagonist. So you want to spend as much time with like your romantic lead figuring out who they are as you do with your protagonist, or as you do with like your antagonist, your villain, because they should have like their own agenda, their own goals, their own motives, their own stakes, like stuff that they're risking to lose, their own conflict and tension in their life. And so a good way to do this, especially if you're going to have your characters like be spending a lot of time with one another, maybe your excuse me maybe your main character, what they want most, their overall goal, somehow intertwines with the romantic lead. Either they want the same thing, they're trying to team up to defeat this villain, or maybe the romantic lead has something that could help the protagonist achieve their overall goal. So they kind of have to work together, and like the protagonist has something that the romantic lead wants. So they're spending time together. They're both getting like something out of the relationship while it's growing, but they both have their own, they both have their own agenda. They're not just solely existing for the purpose of falling in love. And I mean, that exists too in romance, but I think it's always more interesting if like the characters, if there's like an actual plot and like something that they want. And yes, like the whole center story can be love, but it is interesting if there's, another element to it. All right. So, and then you want to make sure that, with those goals and those motives, that romantic lead should have their own character arc. So they should be growing and changing and learning and making mistakes and making their own decisions throughout the novel. And that can kind of be hard to do too, because you're like, I'm just so focused on my protagonist and what they want. But yeah, you want to make sure that romantic lead, they have just some kind of an arc, something. It doesn't have to be as extreme as your protagonist or even your villain, but some kind of like a little growth that the reader can track, and so that they feel like they're growing with this person, that this person's learning, that this person's learning from their mistakes and serves a purpose to the story. And let's see. Okay, so when you're kind of building up, so there's like obviously your their emotional relationship, how they're emotionally connecting with one another, building trust and going about it that way. And then there's like the physical aspect of the relationship. And then depending on what genre you write, of course, if you're writing like young adult or whatever, it's going to be a lot cleaner, a lot like maybe just like a little kiss and very like not like G, maybe PG, but that's about it. And then if you get, into your adult, it can get, whatever, all the way up to R, depending on how detailed your sex scenes are. But there is like it's hard because when you're writing, it's hard to sometimes get it across to the reader that everyone, is enjoying themselves. So this class that I took at a writing conference, they kind of had a list of steps that you can go through and kind of pay attention to like the emotional and the physical contact between the two characters. And you kind of build it scene by scene. And so then that way the reader feels like comfortable when they do first kiss or when they do first hold hands, so and so. So let me take a drink here. Okay. Sorry, I always get awkward when I talk about romance. But so when you're building the emotional connection, so when they're trusting, if they're working together or if they both want the same thing, they can build up a trusting relationship with each other. And then as it goes on, these are kind of like the physical aspects of a relationship. So I'll kind of explain what I do, but when you're starting off, like a lot of this just happens in the very first time that they meet each other, but you have like eye to body, right? So your protagonist notices this romantic lead. They take him in, they give a light description. And so they're looking at one another, and then they make eye contact. So that's next, right? They make eye contact and then they speak. These are usually like how it goes when you meet someone. You see someone, you make eye contact, hi, hello, so that's the natural way to go about it. And so voice and voices, when they actually, have their first dialogue with each other. And then as it goes on, what I like to do is like I'll just do one at a time. So like with my scenes, like if my romantic, like if my two characters who are falling for each other, let's say they have 10 or 20 scenes together throughout the whole book, I'll just kind of like use one and like maybe use one of these gestures, in 2 scenes or whatever, but just kind of like I'm writing a slow burn right now, and so their relationship is definitely, it takes a long time before they get to the first kiss. So I kind of drag this out and kind of tease the reader and make the reader want it by making the protagonist want it, but having to wait and go about it that way. But again, this all changes depending on what genre you write in. So you have eye to body, they look at each other eye to eye, voice to voice, they speak. And then you have hand to hand, like maybe they shake hands, or if they're in a scene where, I don't know, they touch hands on accident, and then you can have your protagonist, they get flutters, whatever, you can kind of, however you want to write that scene. And then you have arm to shoulder, and then arm to waist, so they touch on each other's waist. And then you have mouth to mouth, or like nose to nose, or forehead to forehead, basically just their face, like something is touching. Usually, if you kind of like lean in, you might like touch foreheads before kissing. And then you have like hand to head, so like if they're going again in for the kiss. And then you have hand to body, mouth to body, and then hand to genitals, and genitals to genitals. So those are essentially the steps that they say to slowly have your character show, so that the reader feels comfortable for when they do get to that moment. And then having some kind of consent on the page as far as like, yeah, this is what I want. And again, like if you're writing erotica or dark romance, that's so different. And so this is for, like I said, the Hallmark, the very light romance movies or whatever book that you're writing. And then depending, on which genre. So if you even like, sometimes you can get like really explicit in it. But of course, if you're writing erotica. If not, then you can do just like a fade to black and like let the reader use their own imagination with it and go about it that way. And so let's see. That's pretty much, those are the main ones. This is, again, like I said, very beginner tips, but this is kind of just to get you guys started. The main thing is just to let the reader know that like they're both willing participants. Is if they hold hands, like the romantic lead isn't just like being, going and grabbing your protagonist's hand, like she or he like wants that, right? So you just want to make sure that you get that through the page, get that on the page. But that is pretty much it. All right. Hi, Sam. How's it going? If anyone has any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments, and this will be uploaded on our channel, and I can come back and answer comments later. But that is pretty much it for today. So thanks, guys, for watching. Have a good day.